I'm going to sit. Don't mean any disrespect. We're going to be informal. My name's Carl Cannon. I'm the Washington Bureau Chief of RealClearPolitics. We are co-hosting this event with the Hoover Institution of Stanford University. I'm going to introduce our three speakers, and then they're going to give, these two gentlemen are going to give presentations, and then we're going to have a conversation among the four of us about the midterm elections. This is called Midterm Elections, Where Are We Headed? I hope that when you leave here, you'll know more than you know now, and I'm going to pin these two fine academics down and make them give you a number. And we're talking about mostly the Senate. But first, let me introduce our panelists. This gentleman in the middle here is Douglas Rivers. Doug's an innovator in the field of survey research. That makes him beloved by RealClearPolitics, which was actually formed on the idea that you should aggregate polls, and we took it from there. Doug, like so many bright Stanford guys, Doug's also a successful Silicon Valley entrepreneur. He started, I count 3 companies, your bio says 2. These are startups. He's taught at Harvard, Caltech, UCLA. He's now at Stanford, political science professor and a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. The startups are Preview Systems and Knowledge Networks. Preview Systems pioneered the field of digital rights management. Doug's success there earned him an Executive of the Year award in 2000 by Research Business Report, and an Innovators Award by the American Association of Public Opinion Research the following year. He's currently chief scientist at YouGov Polymetrics, is a CBS News consultant, and the author of too many academic papers to mention. He holds a bachelor's from Columbia University and a Ph.D. from Harvard. This gentleman to my immediate left is David W. Brady. David in politics is usually to my immediate right, but that's neither here nor there. Dave began his teaching career at Kansas State in 1970, moved there to Houston. You taught at the University of Houston and Rice. He moved to Stanford University in 1986 with a joint appointment in the Graduate School of Business and Political Science. To those who know him personally, I'm one of those fortunate people, and several others out there are as well. This dual appointment's not a surprise. Dave's a polymath with his hand in many pies. At Stanford, he served as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, a Vice Provost for Distance Learning, and his titles today include, and I'm going to say this because we never mention this in newspaper articles, Buzz, or in other articles, Tommy, but he's, and academics really hate that you don't mention this in print, but I'll mention it now. He's the Bowen H. and Janice Arthur McCoy Professorship Leadership Values at the Business School. Is that an endowed chair? Is that what that means, those names?
Yes, there's money there, otherwise it wouldn't be mentionable.
And the Davies Family Senior Fellow at Hoover Institution. He's Deputy Director of Hoover. He's a Professor of Political Science in the School of Humanities and Science at the university. Dave's a scholar of Congress, the party system, and public policy. His research focuses on the ties between elections and public policies. This work includes studies of American political history and comparative studies in Britain, Ireland, Korea, and Japan. His most recent project on political responses to the second great transformation of the global economy, and that's what you'll be talking about. Recently, Dave drew on this research for a lengthy essay he wrote as an op-ed for RealClearPolitics. At the risk of giving away his talk, I will sum it up, though, in Twitter-like sum up, okay? Okay. If the process of self-government, Dave asked, is so broken in Washington, in our country, and this hyper-partisanship and gridlock has destroyed everything, including our economy, why are we doing so much better than the rest of the world? That was what I got out of that article, and I edited it, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Dave was also one of the co-authors and editors of a book called Red and Blue Nation, which I noticed this in the Hoover bio this morning, and I thought, well, that looks like an interesting book. And then I thought, wait a minute, I think I have that book, and I do. And then I, upon further reflection, realized I wrote a chapter in the book, so we go back a little ways. David actually didn't agree with what I wrote, but he published it, so that's why we're still friends. The far left is Caitlin Huey-Burns. When Caitlin came to us at RealClearPolitics, she was, well, unemployed in Greenland. It's a Princess Bride illusion. If any of you have children, you know it, the Princess Bride. I thought of the Princess Bride as Caitlin's getting married next month, but actually she wasn't unemployed, and as far as I know has never been to Greenland or Gilder. She did write for politics and the Policy Channel for U.S. News and World Report. She earned a master's degree in journalism from Georgetown University and a bachelor's degree from John Carroll University in Cleveland. Caitlin's been covering politics for us for this year with special attention to some of the Senate races that will determine who controls the upper chamber, and that's what she's going to talk about. We're going to add her real-world reporting analysis to that of our esteemed academics, and with that, Dave Brady, take it away.
Okay. Well, Carl sort of did. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of try and set the background in a few slides for the election. And then Doug, because he has the data from the 100,000 person panel from YouGov, is going to talk about the actual election. So if I could have the first slide. That's not it.
Here's your clicker, buddy.
Oh, I got the clicker. Well, let's click it then. There you go. So that article that Carl talked about, what bothered me, this was a time when everybody was talking about how the U.S. government was broken. And I'm not here to tell you that it's a smoothly functioning institution, but I am here to tell you that I looked up International Monetary Fund data from 2008 to 2014. And in regard to real GDP, unemployment, hourly earnings, and where unit labor costs here, the higher the value, the better it is. When you compare the United States to advanced economies, the G20, the Euro area, the United States is doing pretty well. And so when people said that, well, what was wrong with the American government? Well, mostly it was the Republican Party. Secondly, it was divided government. Third, Rule 22 in the Senate. That all came in. But if the United States government is broken, how about Italy? How about France? How about Germany even at this point? How about England? The fact is, it's pretty hard to blame Rule 22, divided government, the Republican Party, for the slowdown of all those. And the point I was trying to make in the article was, if we actually think about it, what's happening is all of these governments are finding it very, very hard to deal with the issues that have been raised by the second great transformation of the world economy. The first one occurred after the American Civil War to about 1900. And this one is much more important because, frankly, now you have three-quarters of the world, with India and China, three-quarters of the world. And that means certain jobs are gone. They're not coming back to the United States. There are problems. They're not coming back to Europe. And given the really hard questions, particularly hard for the United States, because the United States has military obligations around the world to keep the Straits of Hormuz open. When something happens in the China Sea, it's the Vietnamese communist government that calls for the United States to come in. So the United States has duties there. And second, it's particularly hard to do these sorts of things in an era in which people are talking about global warming. So the European Union and other countries which signed the Kyoto Accords and then proceeded not to, of course, follow them, the European Union has just recently backed off on automobile regulations because their problem is, how do we create jobs in a world in which we pass these environmental rules and then we can't deal with them? So the question is, for me, how are governments responding to this? And in several pieces with Mike Spence, the economist, we dealt with the issue of why governments are slow to do this. But I want to turn then, the second slide is in the U.S. You can see that in 2004 we had unified government. 2006, the House and Senate go to the Democrats. 2008, we once again have unified government. And each one of these cases, by the way, 2004, 2008, it's all interpreted as, well, we've solved the problem. President Bush in 2004 says, I built some capital, I'm now going to spend it. So we put up privatization of Social Security. We know how that worked out. And in 2010, he actually said in an interview, I may have overestimated the capital I had. In 2008, we remember the famous book by James Carville, Why the Democrats Will Rule for the Next Generation, which is apparently shorter than they used to be because 2010 didn't work out. And now we have 2012, which is a repeat, and 2014, which is again going to be a repeat. The only question is the Senate going to go? Now, the only other time in American history where you have this flip, and I'm claiming that this uncertainty, the flip-flopping, is frankly a result of the fact that the world governments are having a very hard time trying to deal with this issue of the economic transformation, jobs leaving, not coming back, what's going to happen. under this condition. And so the next slide is 1874 to 1896. And I don't need to go into the detail, but you can see that's the only other era. And if you want, I'll send you the statistical argument. Never had anyone take me up on that, but I'll send it to you if you want it. But the point is that there was a lot of flip-flopping then too, and the flip-flopping was the result of the same thing. The economy is drastically changing. How do you adjust to that? So the question is, we are, in my view, then in a period of real uncertainty about which way to go in terms of the direction the country ought to take in regard to how do we deal with this great economic transformation. And nobody has an answer. And when I say nobody has an answer, I don't mean just the United States. The Italians don't, the Europeans don't. They do not have no developed democracy has an answer. And so my final slide is, this is from research that Professor Rivers and Fiorina and I have been doing on party identity. This is a sample of Gallup polls from back to 1937. There are about 1,100 total polls. And I guess the important point to remember here is the following thing. About 1985, you can see the Democrats lost their huge lead. The gap between Democrats and Republicans narrows dramatically and does not change much. Independents are a few more independents now. The Democrats have a little bit of a lead. But the claim that I want to make in this case is that what happens in these elections now, given parity, the parties are roughly speaking, given this long historical time period, the parties are now roughly at parity. And what that means in terms of elections is that exacerbates the flip-flopping. Because neither party has an answer to the question. It doesn't matter. So the parties flip-flop. But the main thing, it seems to me, is this, that independents are more moderate. They're less economically liberal than the Democrats. They're less socially conservative than the Republicans. And when the Democrats move too far left, the independents swing the other way. When the Republicans move too far right, as 2004 to 6, then the independents step up and deal things. And that this configuration makes congressional elections in the modern period a bit more difficult to predict than they had been in the past, when we all knew the rules. The president's party always loses in the off year, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I'll quit and turn to Doug, who's going to talk about the actual election.
So I'm down in the weeds here in the middle of data collection in this election. We at YouGov have a project with CBS News and the New York Times Upshot, where we've put together approximately 130,000 people spread across every state, every congressional district, where we're interviewing them 4 times. The first wave was in August. The second wave was a couple weeks ago. The next wave will be in the next 2 weeks, and then a final release the week before the election. So it's somewhat different polling than is conventional media polling. It generated some heat among pollsters. In that this is an online panel. It's not random sampling. It essentially works by trying to put together samples of people that are representative based on known characteristics. And the characteristic that is the sort of key to making it work is past vote. So most of these people were interviewed in 2012. So we know how they voted in 2012. Current day polling, your typical telephone poll and so forth, is a one-shot affair where you put together a sample and you hope that random selection will balance out all the biases. Though in these days the response rates are in the single digits, and if you look at the samples, it's rather obvious that they haven't removed the biases, that the samples are clearly off on demographics. What we attempt to do is not just to fix the sample based on demographics, but to balance the sample based on prior vote, and that's 2010 and 2012 vote. so that we're able to actually look at changes of people. And then over the course of the campaign, we're looking at between wave changes to see if there's movement one direction or the other to get around the problem of the bouncing poll ball going between different polls. That is, we're trying to give Carl less to do at RealClearPolitics since our numbers don't bounce around so much. So anyway.
The right, one on the right, Doug.
Good with technology here.
I am, thank you.
So I'm not allowed to talk about the House very long, though. This is the biggest House poll ever done. We did oversamples in 65 House races. And unfortunately, there's not a ton of suspense on what the outcome of the House election is going to be. Our current estimate is 239 to 240 Republican seats. We are able to actually look at the toss-up races. So they're about, depending on who's counting, 10 to 12 toss-up races. And in fact, Democrats are leading slightly in about 2/3 of those. So I would not be surprised that the final outcome in the House is almost no pickup for the Republicans, which is obviously unusual in the midterm. But it's not going to be, there's no wave that would give us a surprise outcome in the House.
Can I interrupt and ask a question here? Is that because there's just so few competitive districts left? Is that why that is?
Well, there are fewer competitive districts this year than there were, for example, in 2010. And there has been a bit of a long-term decline, but there are enough races that if the economy were the other way, Obama was at 60% popularity, we might be having a different discussion.
Okay.
But I'm happy to talk more about the House. But all right, so everyone's focusing on the Senate. Unfortunately, Carl and his brethren have taken most of the fun out of this because now everyone realizes you don't pay attention to the most recent poll, you average them, and you get something that in 2012 gave us the outcome of every state in the presidential election, including in a whole bunch of relatively close races. And so now there is a cottage industry of this. No good thing goes uncompeted against, is the Hoover belief. So the Senate this year is pretty much the same approach that was used in 2012 is being used on the Senate. These are our estimates of what the outcome would be. So our estimate is 51. Carl asked for a number. 51 is the number I'm sticking with. But you can see...
Doug, let's hold it 1 second. Does everybody here know it's the Republicans need 6 seats. They need to pick up 6 to get to 51. They have 43 now. Is that or 45, Caitlin? 45. They need 6. There's 30. They need a net 6, and there are 36 races this year because we've had a death and 2 retirements. So you got them going to 50. That's 51. That's the magic number.
You guys have them at 52.
Yeah, but because I'm an academic, we have these things called confidence intervals. And so I'm telling you, if you look there, you see 51 has a probability we estimate of 18%. And there's a 17% probability of 50. So don't shoot me if I'm wrong.
Every reporter here would be happy with 50. I'm not going to say why.
So a little more into the detail of these races, and you can see why this is not going to be as glorious a year for the poll aggregators as 2012 was. By my count, there are about 11 races that people are talking about at some level at the moment. So there's some recent polling, for example, claiming that New Hampshire is close. I don't believe it's close. And Caitlin was telling me there's a new poll out showing Colorado is even. I don't believe that race is close either. So I think those two are pretty safe. On the other end...
Safe for the Democrats?
Yes.
Okay.
On the other end, the McConnell race in Kentucky, I think nearly everybody has McConnell up by about 5 points, but that was believed to be pretty competitive for a while. The Kansas race, our last poll was done while there were still 3 candidates. I don't believe Kansas will end up being close, but there's obviously polling at the moment showing the independent candidate even or even ahead. So anyhow, that would be, if you're asking me to make my bets, I'd say those things aren't very controversial. Michigan is a place where we're a little different than all the other polling out there. And my pollster friends tell me I'm insane. But I've looked at the data, and I got a lot of data in Michigan. And so the bulk of the polls show about a 5-point Democratic lead for Peters in the Michigan Senate race. We show Peters up by about 1.5 points among registered voters. And then when you do the dark arts of likely voter screens, it ends up being basically an even race. So that would be quite a surprise if it turns out to be that way. As I say, we're out on the limb. Everybody else has got that one colored blue and safe. The Georgia race, I think the consensus of the polling, certainly our stuff, shows that the Republicans have a small but pretty stable lead there. And that leaves 5 races in my toss-up category, not in everybody else's, but these are the ones where I wouldn't be surprised with any outcome in any one of these. Alaska, there isn't a ton of polling in Alaska. The samples are small. It's really hard to do a poll in Alaska. You know, your phone houses in the East Coast don't really want to call Alaska. We aggregated, for putting together our model, a couple 100,000 interviews done over the last few years. And it turns out the total number of media poll interviews in the Roper Center archive in Alaska was 200. So you guys aren't calling Alaska. Okay. My prediction there is that the Republicans win that one. But our polling shows it a 2-point race, and most people think it's could go either way or have no.
2 points who, Doug?
2
points which?
We have Begich down by a couple of points. Don't ask me too many of the details on these races.
Sorry.
I once did a paper with Brady where I knew the numbers of the German lender, but I couldn't say their names. Okay, Arkansas is the prior race. We show that dead even. A lot of people show a little bit of a Republican lead there. Certainly wouldn't be surprised if, as things sort of become clear over the next couple months, that one goes red. Iowa, we actually have a Democrat up by a point there, and most people show that race is very tight. Come back to Louisiana in a second. North Carolina, the Hagan race, most of the polls have Hagan up now by 3 or 4 points. We show that race as even. So assuming, as Carl said, the Republicans need to gain 6 of this list. If the Democrats get 6 of this list, they hold of these 11. So if you count up and you say, well, gee, the Republicans win Kentucky, Kansas, Georgia, and 2 of Alaska, Arkansas, Iowa, and North Carolina, that leaves it with Louisiana. Well, the Louisiana race, is this jungle primary, and my prediction is Mary Landrieu wins that, but doesn't get to 50%. There are 2 Republicans that are splitting the vote a bit, which means that we will have neither party having control at that point, and it'll be decided a month later.
So we should be talking about the December elections, not the November elections.
So the good news for us in this business is we'll get a longer run than we usually get, where they close the curtains on us on the day after the election. All right, now first, a few caveats here. First, likely voter screens move this result quite a bit. Okay, and in 2010, you had anywhere from a 3 to 6 point movement between registered voters and likely voters. Everybody does different likely voter questions, has a different approach for dealing with it, and the dirty little secret is none of them are very good. They're not reliable. So we can look between waves at people who tell us they're likely voters and not. And we have past panel data of which people actually voted. We go back and check up on their registration records. And likely voter screens just aren't very useful for this. And that drives everybody's result on this election. That if you had registered voters, Democrats would be in great shape in the Senate. But the fact is, likely voters moving 1 to 2 points will make the difference. And we're in the alchemy stage of science here. Let me talk a little briefly about a few other things going in the election. One of the things we've asked people is, in deciding how to vote, is it important which party gains control of Congress in the election? And what you see is that in every state where there's a competitive race, more Republicans think it's more important which party gains control of Congress than Democrats do. That's consistent across everywhere at this point. Okay. Second thing is, we asked, is President Obama a factor in how you're voting here? And what we see is that for, this is the percent that say he's not a factor. So most Democrats say, not a factor. This election isn't about Obama. And most Republicans say, yeah, it is a factor. Okay, huge differences there. Okay, and so what we really have is a kind of half nationalized election. The Republicans are running on, we're running against Obama, that's their common theme. And Republican voters are responding by, we want Republicans to control Congress. And Democrats everywhere are running, you know, even ads against Obama by the Democratic candidates saying, you know, I'm not going to be a supporter of President Obama. So that's not atypical in midterms. Presidents don't help their parties in midterms. It's, you know, you typically lose votes, and the question is how many you're going to lose. The last thing is the enthusiasm gap. That is, at what rate are people actually going to turn out? So this is the data I just said wasn't very good, but it's all we got. And so across different races, you can see the difference in the percentage of people who say they're definitely will vote. So your typical likely voter scale, they vary depending on how many categories you have in it, that ranges from a few to 10 or 11. The problem is everybody, all registered voters, end up near the top of the scale. Anybody who's not fairly close to the top turns out isn't going to vote at all. There is a gender bias in this question. That is, men are much more likely to tell you they're going to vote, will definitely vote, than women. My wife tells me it's a male trait.
She's right.
But the fact is, we know, in fact, that the electorate will be composed of more women than men, but the likely voter question has this male skew. So we do various things that attempt to correct for that, but it's not a wonderful thing. So the big question is the gap that we're seeing here, is this a large one or a small one? And it turns out it's smaller than it was in 2010. But not as small as it was in 2012. In presidential years, the gap is next to negligible, and likely voter screens turn out not to make much difference in presidential elections. But in the midterm, it's a big deal. So have some skepticism about all the poll results at the moment, given how many close races we have and how much is being driven by who you decide the voters are.
Thank you, Doug. All right, I've got some questions for all of you. Caitlin, I want to bring you in here at this point. Our RCP, our toss-up list, very close to Doug's. We do have Colorado in there, so we have 12, 9 toss-ups, and then 3 leans. And one, the leaning Democrat is leaning Democrat are Michigan and Minnesota. We have leaning Republican. Kansas is now a toss-up for us. Leaning Republican is Kentucky, but the list is very close to that.
And this also assumes that Republicans have already taken West Virginia, South Dakota,
and Montana.
And Montana.
Yeah. Can we talk? So, let's talk about Montana for a minute. It's on nobody's list, but why is it? But the reason it's on nobody's list is instructive, because I want to ask you to talk about specific and peculiar things going on in these states that have nothing to do with this macro picture or in addition to it.
Yeah.
Take Montana.
Each state this cycle really has its own personality, each race, and Democrats are doing that intentionally to combat the national attacks coming from Republicans. Montana was an interesting case on so many levels because Democrats had done this switcheroo of sorts where they Max Baucus, the incumbent, was planning on retiring at the end of his term. They sent him out early, made him ambassador of China, picked up the Democratic candidate already running for his seat, and put him in that place. So he
didn't have to do tax reform either.
Yeah. So Montana was always going to be a really tough race for Democrats with Baucus gone, but with Senator now Walsh, they thought they had a really winning candidate, military experience, good record, so they thought. And the New York Times reported that he was involved in a plagiarism scandal just a few years ago while getting his master's degree, and that really made waves in the state, and he had editorial boards calling for him to get out. So he left the race, and Democrats were scrambling, put up a candidate who is not going to do well. So that was kind of a strategy gone wrong, I think, developed there, even though it was going to be.
Let me ask you also about Iowa. Now, here's a state. There's all these, these. Doug says it's a half nationalized election, but that in Iowa, so you have a candidate, a Democrat, a trial lawyer, who decides that the best way to compete. You went to college there, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I thought you were going with that half national election.
No, well,
the
but
castration deal.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Not a good
Yeah,
deal.
so his idea of how to run a campaign in Iowa was to insult farmers, right? So. So did he make that close?
Yeah, there are a couple things in Iowa. First, Iowa's interesting because we're going to be looking at Iowa beyond this election. We're not going to be looking at Arkansas and Louisiana in 2016. We are going to be looking at Iowa. Republican and Democratic candidates are already going there for the presidential race. But Bruce Braley, the Democratic candidate, has made some public missteps. The
gaffes, we like to call them.
We like to call them in the reporting world. That was one of them. Talk about races having their own personalities. Republicans are playing up the fact that a neighbor has claimed that Braley threatened a lawsuit over the neighbor's chickens going into his yard, and so that's kind of blown up there through the media and pushing from opponents because the race is so close to kind of make this race about Iowa values and saying that Braley doesn't have those.
So Joe Biden could be the preside over the Senate. That's what we root for in the press. Or you could get to Doug's 51, which would mean that you'd have an investigation onto the IRS scandal not chaired by Darrell Issa because a trial lawyer in Des Moines doesn't like chickens in his yard. And all these guys, all their data doesn't really matter. It's chicken in the yard, castration comments. Mm-hmm. It can come down to that, can't it? This is
in a close election, yes.
Caitlin, let me ask you one other question, and I want to ask this question to Doug and Dave too. Yeah, Doug's penultimate slide there, the one that shows that Democrats don't think they don't want this to be a nationalized election. They don't want it to be about Obama. Doug, you said that that's typical, and that's not atypical. But it reminds me, you did a story on this, that what the Democrats, their strategy really is they have better candidates. Mm-hmm. That's their strategy. And the Republicans, off the record, will say, yeah, they do have some strong candidates in places that they shouldn't win. And Louisiana is the state that I think of. I hear every 6 years Mary Ellen is going to lose. Jim Barnes and I have written about this. She never loses. So tell me what they have going for them.
So if you go back to 2012, Democrats say that was kind of their saving grace. I mean, they were able to win in North Dakota when the president lost by double digits. So they've really tried to make candidate recruitment a big part of their vetting candidates. It didn't really work in Montana, so that was why that was interesting. But in places like Louisiana, Arkansas, Alaska, Georgia, they're playing to this family legacies, state connections. Democrats are trying to prove incumbents Kay Hagan in North Carolina is another vulnerable one. This sense of resiliency that they can localize their races enough to kind of inoculate themselves from whatever's happening nationally. So in Alaska, Mark Begich is making this race about how Alaskan are you, and so he's having ads where he's riding around in snowmobiles and criticizing his Republican opponent, Dan Sullivan, for owning a home in Maryland, and not really being Alaskan enough. And
more Alaskan than thou, Dave.
Yeah. And so, the residency issue is playing in a bipartisan way. Mary Landrieu, the Washington Post reported recently that she actually doesn't own a home on her own in Louisiana. She lives here. So, that kind of invoked all the specter of Dick Lugar and some others. Kansas is another example. Roberts had faced those allegations as well. So sometimes those can play in ways, they play differently in different states and in different parties too.
Caitlin, let me use Kansas as a segue. Dave, this slide here, and Doug, I want you to talk about this too. Kansas is a very interesting thing there. And it makes me, can I just ask it this way? Maybe we're looking at this wrong. Maybe what we're looking at is an anti-incumbent election and not an anti-Obama election. Pat Roberts is in trouble. Look at this. It's your poll, Doug.
Yeah, so Republicans shouldn't be fighting for their life in Kansas.
Right.
So you'd normally say if this election's going to turn on Kansas, then the Republicans are not going to gain control of the Senate.
They haven't had a Democratic senator since 1930.
So is this maybe are we looking at it wrong? Is an anti-incumbent? Is that the real
Yeah.
powerful thing out there? What are you picking up?
So much of our narrative is based on presidential elections where we know who the candidates are, the voters know who the candidates are, they're big national affairs, high levels of information. And then we have this Kansas race where the candidates change. You've got a guy, I don't know, is he a Democrat, is he a Republican? My guess is he'd organize with the Democrats, but he's being a little coy about that.
So was a guy from Maine.
Yeah. The situation is voters know a lot less about this election. Their minds are less made up. Now, one of the things that political science research has been pretty convincing on is people may not know their minds at this, in the summer or even early in the campaign, fall campaign, but they end up migrating back to about where you expect them to be. So all the idiosyncratic stuff seems to average out, and you can predict better where people are going to end up than what they will tell you. So for example, in our Michigan data at the moment, something on the order of 30% of the blacks in Michigan say they're unsure about how they're going to vote in the Senate election. And we are pretty confident that the ones that will vote will end up voting Democratic at probably a certainly 80% rate and possibly above 90%. They voted for Stabenow almost 95% in the 2012 exit poll. I think you see a lot of noise that we tell stories about, and it will be less important a month from now than it is today.
So it won't hinge on hog castration.
My prediction is this will not be a castrating election.
Dave, what do you think? Dave, the Kansas thing.
Doug, it's not a castrating election. No, I don't have any. I don't really have anything to add to that. It is the dark art of who's going to turn out, and it looks like in Kansas, that's a state where the Republicans are in trouble, and it's truly unbelievable for them to be in trouble because they just don't elect Democratic senators from there.
Right.
And so this guy's playing the independent card, which way he'll go. But it's interesting that the Democrat dropped out to give this guy a better shot. So, in the end, whether the Senate goes 51-50 or 50-50 or 52-40, on those, you're exactly right. There's 30 little factors that no amount of polling and no amount of confidence levels for us is going to be able to tell us what determines those two or three. The argument is, on average, it's going to sort of balance out, but that doesn't mean in a specific election that it will.
What's interesting about that, too, voters paying attention, is that With outside groups playing and with ads have been running in these states for over a year. You know, and operatives in all of these places are kind of saying that Columbus Day is now the new Labor Day, where people start paying attention in October. So that's just kind of an interesting phenomenon. There's millions and millions of dollars being poured into ads that people have been seeing on their TV screens, and they're not really coming into these races until October.
Doug, what are Caitlin, I'll ask you what the ramifications of this would be. What are the chances, are the Republicans' chances really compromised of taking over if McConnell loses? Can they win without Kentucky?
No.
Really?
I agree.
Okay.
And where do you have Kentucky?
We have McConnell up, I think, 4.
Okay.
So
So they don't have a path
I don't
without
think
that
it'll be
state.
that close in the end.
Really? All right, can we switch gears for a minute? Looking beyond 2014. Dave, you've been doing some work on this. If the Republicans pull this off, what you're going to hear from them, they're going to own both houses of Congress. They're going to say, we're fine. Everybody's been writing these stories that we suck, don't know what they're talking about. The demographics, who cares? And they're going to go back to thinking that they're in charge. They don't have to change their message, their approach, their tone, their policies, or anything. Do you think that would be
That would be a big mistake.
Okay.
Because the 2016 election won't be the 2014 election. There'll be more Hispanics, more African Americans, more young people voting in 2016 than there were in 2014. I think my view is the Republican Party's big problem will be to constrain. If they imagine they take the Senate and the House, there are going to be those in the Republican Party who want to impeach the president and do all sorts
repeal
of
the ACA,
reveal preferences, and which isn't going to happen. So, and my view of that is, I was asked one point to write a piece on Nancy Pelosi's speakership from 2007 and 8, and I wrote a piece and gave her a pretty good grade because I said, you know, the easy thing to say is, oh, I don't agree with her policies, so the hell with her. But the argument was, what could she do with what she had? And I thought, given that there were people in the Democratic Party that wanted to impeach Bush, she did a very good job of constraining the whacks in her party from trying to go after the president, what would harm them in the 2008 presidential election. So she knew she knew they weren't going to pass anything, and she constrained them to not harm their party in 2008. And when I look at the effect of the election, I want to look to see what the Republicans in the House, especially if they take the Senate, what they try and do, and are they constrainable in that sense so they don't hurt themselves going into 2016.
Doug, what does your data show on this? Long term, looking ahead.
Well, I'm just trying to get through this election, and then I'll think about 2016.
Well, I'll answer that for you then. Long term in regard to, if you do the generational thing on social issues, it looks really bad for Republicans because the students at Stanford and people like that, they do not care about gay marriage. They just don't care about stuff. It's irrelevant. And so when you do that chart, that it just doesn't look good. And second, if the immigration issue continues to be big, well, gee, the question is, will there be more Latino voters over time or fewer? And then the question is, well, gee, would you like them to vote for you or against you?
Well, there's going to be
more. So unless they make some changes along those lines, I don't view that as by 2018, 2020. I don't see those as very good trends for them unless they change their position on immigration, don't sound so harsh on it, and start to change their positions. And it's easy to say what they now say, oh, we're going to have a big tent, the economy will be a big one, then everybody can have their own views. But that's great. I'm waiting for the first debate where the first person, the reporter says, how many of you, 13 candidates on the Republican Party, are opposed to, I think one abortion is too many. And I want to see how many stand up.
All of them.
They're all going to stand up. And then guess what? That's April, that's February, that's March. And then during the campaign in November, they get beat up with that on every station that matters. So
well, this reminds me, Caitlin, of Colorado. You've got Senator Udall. You'd think there is an actual war on women in that state if you were paying attention to the ads there. And it's led by the Republican Party.
Colorado is such an interesting case. The day after the Republican announced that he was getting in, Democrats started running ads on things like personhood and access to contraception. The Republican there has come out and said that he would approve over-the-counter contraception. So that's kind of the ground zero for that. But to the larger point about what happens after 2014. Republicans also have to remember that majority, if they attain it, can be temporary. In 2016, you're looking at a very different map in terms of the Senate. So you have the presidential race, which is going to...
you mean, in the Senate races in 2016?
In the Senate races in 2016, you have places like Pennsylvania, Florida, Ohio. I think we'll see a reverse dynamic there. And Democrats are saying in 2016, we get to start all over again. We're going to have a new candidate. We're going to have a new map.
So they could lose the Senate quickly as they got it.
And then take it back. So I think that's what we're going to see from them.
Well, the thing you got to understand about the midterm is it's very much easier to run a negative campaign in midterm against an incumbent president than it is to run a negative campaign in a presidential election. And the issue configuration at the moment is not great for Republicans. Immigration is the issue that polls best for them, but tactically it's terrible because it costs you votes and will cost votes in places like Florida, California, Texas.
Well, in Colorado. You don't have Colorado close. Is that the reason, the Hispanic vote? Yeah.
I mean, the Hispanics voted over 70%
I'm getting signals from my handlers that we promised you drinks, and so before we get to drinks, we have to go to audience questions. Anybody who has...
I just want to say one thing. I find it hard to believe that you have handlers.
Yeah.
That you pay attention to.
Advisors, then.
I don't believe that either, but go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, Aaron Witcher, she's an advisor of mine.
Okay.
All right. Steve Thoma, McClatchy News.
Thanks. I have a question for Dave. In your earlier chart, when you put up the 1870s, 80s, and 90s as a comparable period with no real order, that ended in a political order, the Progressive era. Do you see anything moving us off this? And if so, what would it take to move us in one direction or another?
Okay, so that, I was hoping no one would ask that. So I used to think that, well, the answer to that was there was a realigning election in 1894-96. The Republicans came in. The forces that were for keeping the small family farms and the forces that were against capitalism declined. But for me, the problem now is that I always thought of it as, well, what can the government do? It has to be somehow the government making a decision. But I think what happens is that, bankers and companies are making decisions right now. They don't wait for the election. There's no uncertainty. They decide where they're going to put factories, where they're going to put plants, what their relationship with China is going to be, where the finances are going to go. And in the 1890s, the solution for the United States was, I don't think the United States ended up with a government policy. They just saw that the train had left. And if you were going to be a modern nation state, you were going to trade, you were going to have these sorts of policies, and they got on board, the gold standard, et cetera. So my view is I do not see anything at present that lets me say that there's going to be, that there's a clear answer from either the Democrats or Republicans. So what I've been trying to follow is on Project Syndicate, among other places, what these economists think are happening with the flows of money and where companies are going, where they're putting things, because it may just be that if we sit in this uncertain state for a long time, you either get that the economy has moved one direction, you either get on or you don't. But I don't think there's any clear answer to that.
Anybody else? Jim, you want to ask about the House?
Well, I want to ask about the House, but I'll ask a kind of a related question to that. There are kind of two competing theories of elections. One is there are really precious few independent voters, truly independent voters, swing voters, and the path to success is based on mobilizing your base in your party. The other theory of elections is an older one that people like Dick Scammon used to preach is elections are fought between the 40-yard lines in American politics. So swing voters are really primary. As you look at the midterm elections, which one of these theories do you think is going to end up having more impact on the outcome and why?
Well, my view is there's a bigger pool of swing voters than we sometimes think. That the leaning partisans, contrary to common argument, and this is a piece that Brady and Ph.D. and I are working on, are actually much more up for grabs than people think. The problem with mobilizing your base is if you look at the proportion of the electorate that, say blacks make up, or women, or young people, or whatever, those things are amazingly stable between elections and don't move around much. So it's hard to explain, for example, the shift from 2008 to 2012 by anything other than, fewer people were voting for Obama and were willing to vote for a Republican in 2012.
Or 10.
And 2010 from 2006 was a swing to the Republicans from people who had been voting Democratic.
So so part of the reason this project is when the University of Michigan did the original merit, there was a 7-point scale that went from strong Democrat to weak Democrat to independent leaning Democrat, and then out to the Republican side. The problem with that is the weak Democrat and independent leaning Democrat categories they're not really transitive. And an independent leaning Democrat, that could just be, so in 2008, I'm going to vote for Obama, and they asked me, am I an independent? Yes, I'm an independent, but they say, are you leaning? Yes, I am leaning. I'm leaning Democrat. It could be my vote intention versus I am an independent leaning Democrat, and it's really hard to sort that out. So one of the great things about the data set Doug has is we have this data set from 2004 to 2014 where we can kind of measure exactly those pull-offs so we can have a better picture and answer Jim's question in a straightforward way. What's the likelihood that someone who says they're a weak or leaning Democrat is more likely to swing their vote, and on what issues would they do so? And so we're going to have some stuff. We can answer the question in about 3 years. Sorry.
Yeah. In 2010, it seemed to me that the independent vote was a formidable force in that election. And this year, this time around, they seem to be a coherent, formidable force once again. On the economy, they're always very serious. And now, on Obama, they seem to be very serious and very alarmed about his foreign policy. So it seems to me that that independent vote is going to count for a lot in every one of these elections. But you didn't talk about that, so what do you think about the independent vote? What do you see about it as a factor in this election?
Well, the fact that Republicans are winning the independent vote is where they're getting the majority in this election. So I don't think there's a lot of mystery about that's what will drive the outcome, and will they get enough of the independent vote, because they need, there are fewer Republicans than there are Democrats, and so Republicans need to win independents to win the election.
And where are those independents coming from? Are they, if the independent group is growing, are they coming from Democrats or are they coming from Republicans?
Most of the movement is around the edges of independence. So people go from weak partisans to leaning independents. They don't go from strong partisans to independent, and they hardly ever cross the divide from Republican to Democrat. The party is very stable at a kind of level of people, don't end up migrating from one side to the other, but they migrate from party to independent and back.
And in the long, so that's exactly right. And that's not me. Is
that me?
Not me. Okay. I don't even have a phone. So no, I'm kidding. So the reason it seems to me that's particularly that point is particularly. Now I forgot what the hell the point was.
No one's answering at the Hoover Institution.
So so the question is, these independents are determinative, but it varies state by state how many there are, and nobody moves exactly. Nobody goes from Democrat to Republican or back. They all move around sort of. They were a Democrat, then they move to, I'm going to move toward independent. And we don't have a long enough cycle to see if they move from Democrat to independent. But nobody goes Republican to Democrat, vice versa. They all move towards independence, and when they're in that slot, then they're more likely to vote for somebody of the somebody of the other party. On foreign policy, one last question.
Yeah,
there's no effect on the election of the foreign policy stuff. Where not only does Doug not have it, I just talked to the guy who does trending, whatever that is. I know what Trendy is on Facebook. They take all these things.
Then there's Sean Trendy, our analyst.
He's a good guy. But trending for Facebook, they're doing the 2014 election, and out of 220 issues where people are talking about the congressional election, foreign affairs ranks 218th.
Well, you know, may I make a comment about that? You saw something in this town that you don't often see. Both sides said, without much fanfare, that they wouldn't use this ISIS thing politically. The president said so overtly, and the Republicans said so with a vote today, Caitlin. And I mean, nobody knows how it's placed, and nobody wants to.
So my view is the reason they both say that is they're both uncertain of what the effect is, so they punt.
Maybe it's because they're deeply patriotic, Dave.
Sure. Okay.
I'm sorry, Caitlin. I would like to say, though, on foreign policy, I mean, you are starting to see it in some ads. It's not resonating as well as other things.
You are?
In New Hampshire, you're seeing it in ads. And Republicans see it as a way to build that larger case against the president that they've been trying to build, kind of the trust issues, the competency issues, and that sort of thing. So while you don't see it
what are they arguing in the ad? Not that we have more troops, just that he's weak.
That right.
Okay.
And, yeah.
In the back, no? Okay. Oh, right here then. All right, maybe this will be the last question, and we can have a drink. Aaron? Okay.
All for a drink. There have been some trends in the public polling the last couple of weeks that some observers have commented on, and that is in the red states, it has been trending Republican. In the toss-up states, it's been trending Democratic. And in the toss-up states, the Democrats have been pushing social issues, have been trying to push their opponents to the extreme. And I wanted to comment, because I can't remember who said it, but somebody said that independents are conservative on economic issues and liberal on social issues, and just wondering if that holds up. Is that fitting in with your comment?
I'll leave other comments to Doug, but it is true that when you look at these numbers, they're more. They're more. If you compare independents, even leaning Democrat, leaners and lean Republican, they are more conservative than strong Democrats on economic matters, and they are much more liberal on social issues than are strong Republicans. So they are sort of in the middle, and my view then would be that has to have an effect in some of these races, and that's the issues the Democrats should push because, as Doug pointed out, more women are going to vote than men, and these issues are important. So when Carl made the point either about the election in Colorado being a war on women, I have a wife and 3 daughters, and I don't need to know that. I hear that every day. They call me on the phone and feed me these numbers. So it's an issue that works for Democrats. It works with women, particularly young women, and those are demographic groups that favor Democrats. So if I was advising Democrats, that's the strategy I'd tell them to use.
I think I'm going to, and this is fitting, give Dave Brady the last word. Tommy, did you have a question?
I want to ask a quick question.
Okay.
Would each of you please assign a percentage figure on would each of you please assign a percentage to the probability of either Democrats hanging on or Republicans taking the Senate, however you want to parse it?
So so if it's 50-50, what do we say there in that case?
Yeah, 50%.
That's the Democrats retain control.
Okay, good. All right.
Do you think it's
So what?
No, I just wanted to know how you wanted that treated. First guess,
He
I
doesn't
would
know
say,
much about Congress, so I had to fill him in
I
on
would
the
say,
House and Senate
yeah, thanks a
rules
lot.
here.
I would say I would say, well, you could be talking about the election in which 50-50 would be a draw, which would be different from control.
Are you filibustering?
Yes, I am. 0.6. I'd say the probability is 0.6 that the Republicans have 51 seats in the House.
60%, basically.
It's 0.6, yeah. 60%, sorry.
Professor Rivers?
0.62.
Caitlin, who covers Congress, is not allowed to answer.
Why?
I think I'm gonna root for the tie.
Yeah, the Joe Biden is presiding officer
that's
thing.
50
That's a good instinct, kid.
And what's your number, Carl?
Resolved in Louisiana.
Oh, yeah, she
What's your number?
I'd like to.
yeah.
What's your number?
50% probability.
You think it 50% probability of 50-50?
Yep.
That's good. Get the
All right,
quarter out.
I'm going to end there. I'm going to, for those, many of the reporters here, the Hoover Institution has been a great friend to journalism and friend to specific journalists. Many of them in this room, and Dave Brady is going to get the last word, as is fitting. But I want to thank a couple of people first. I want to thank Aaron Witcher of Hoover, and Paige Mathis of Hoover, and Christina Perel of Hoover, and Amy Polguta of Hoover, who made this happen, and Meg Szabo, Szabo is how her father pronounces that, who's our director of events. She told me today Hoover did all the work. That's a direct quote, but I know that's not true because she and Shelby Lopez got me here, and that's a lot of work right there. So thank you, too. Anyway, thank you, everyone, and now, Aaron, we adjourn to the roof.